Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Total War Warhammer 2. Today, of course, a new patch has dropped, a new DLC has been released, lots of really interesting changes have been made in both multiplayer and campaign balancing, and we're going to talk about some of that stuff, the most interesting of those things. But first, we have a question to answer. Can Grimgor Ironhide, the biggest and the baddest, the meanest and the greenest, win in a straight-up fight against the albino lizard man himself, Gorok, the Rock of Itza? Let's find out. These guys they're both foot combat lords, they're both melee focused, they've both got their abilities and everything mainly focused around that, but it remains to be seen if Grimgor, the old reliable, the whipping boy for so long, can take on Gorok. Gorok's popping buffs. We're going to pop buffs and get in there with a bang. So you can see Gorok here has the Mace of Unamak, which is actually a really powerful item. Much more powerful than Grimgor's Gitsnik. But it doesn't recharge as fast, at least not in melee. He also has the Shield of Aeons, which gives him expert charge defense, and the Rock of Itza, which gives him 44% physical resist. But I think, with the WA bonus at least, I think Grimgor is absolutely taking Gorok to Pound Town. Look at this. Gorok is getting the shit kicked out of him. That really, really high melee attack is definitely paying off because he is hitting Gorok very, very reliably. And as you can see here, in melee, Gitsnik recharges incredibly fast. So Grimgor is about to get another pop of his massive damage booster. There it goes again. He's up to 490 armor-piercing damage when that goes down, and I don't think Gorok can take this kind of a beating. Nope, there he goes. The Great White Lizard has been defeated, and now Grimgor Ironhide, with his weird speed of 38, is going to chase him down and destroy him, losing only half health. So, I think we've established Grimgor is still the best. Wait for it. There it goes. Look at that scaly prick running. In any case, so, I just wanted to do that because I love Grimgor, and I'm super sad that he is still, despite getting buffed again, still not really viable in multiplayer just by virtue of what he is. But there have been a lot of changes to the game. I'm only going to talk about a few of them, because the fact of the matter is, I have not really delved in super deep yet. I didn't get early access or anything. Of course, I'm not that important. But it's very interesting what they've done with the game. The biggest change is unit caps. So in multiplayer now, the unit cap limits the total number of units of a given type that you can have. It limits not only unit types, it also limits individual units. Now, we had individual unit caps in tournament rules before, and we've had some fiddle-faddling around with categories, I believe, but this is the first time we've had set explicit unit caps in just the standard game. So this is going to really change the way armies are constructed on the ladder. The unit caps are very similar to the Warhammer Cup rules that are used very commonly in tournaments, but there are some differences. They're a little bit looser in some ways. But if you look here, you can see, like, for example, we have the Night Goblin War Boss. Even on the Great Cave Squig, I don't think he counts against any unit caps. However, Azag the Slaughterer, if you put him on Skullmuncha, counts as a flying unit and a rare single entity. So various different categories now have different caps. Flying units have a cap of 5, so you can't spam air power anymore. Which, in some ways, I'm not sure how well that's going to work out, but I think it's a laudable goal. Rare single entities, cap of 3. That's actually a cap that really hits the Lizardmen, because a lot of their powerhouses are rare single entities. All Slann are rare single entities. Krotgor on his dinosaur, on Grimlock, is a rare single entities and a Carnosaur. And, of course, all of their dinosaurs are rare single entities. So, for example, even the humble feral Bastillodon counts as a rare single entity, which means that from now on, unless they change this, you are never going to see a Lizardman army with more than 3 dinosaurs. They can only ever have 3, or more than 2 Carnosaurs. So you can't anymore have, like, an Old Blood on a Carnosaur, and a Scar Veteran on a Carnosaur, and a Feral Carnosaur. You can't have triple Carnosaur builds anymore. Not that anybody really did that in multiplayer, I don't think. But now it's not possible. I'm not sure how that's... on the one hand, I kind of approve of that, because what that means is you can't do, like, 7... You know, the archetypical 9 model or 7 model army is no longer possible. And even if you're playing as, you know, as Lizardmen, you can't now have, like, just an army of Stegodons or something ridiculous like that. But, on the other hand, I mean, like, the whole thing of Lizardmen is kind of having the big armored monsters. I don't know. I'm torn a little bit, because personally, I always felt that the ability to either spam infantry or spam just tons and tons and tons of heavily armored dinosaurs was kind of like a real strength of the Lizardmen, and sort of made them very hard to counter for a lot of other factions. But we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it works out. Overall, I think it's a positive change. And, of course, with those limits, they're now a lot better about limiting certain kinds of abuse. Like, for example, there is a limit now on units with a 360-degree firing arc. There's also a limit on missile cavalry, as well as the individual unit limits. So you can see here, you can't have more than 6 units with 360-degree firing arcs. Now, in most armies, that doesn't make a difference, because most armies, with any semblance of balance, didn't take more than 6, or even 6, 360-degree firing arc units in the first place. It only really makes a difference for certain kinds of cheese armies. For example, if we look at the Skaven roster, we used to have those armies where you would take, you know, like back in the day, where you would have like 4 gutter runners with poison and then 4 more additional gutter runners. You can't do that stuff anymore, because 360-degree firing arc units are limited. For the Dark Elves, I think the Dark Elves had one where you could spam their skirmish cavalry. The Dark Riders with the Peter crossbows count towards that missile cavalry limit, so they're also limited. And of course you have other 360-degree skirmisher units like the Black Arc Corsairs with handbows, that kind of stuff. Anyway, all these limits basically just mean you can't build a completely mono-focused army that spams out a single kind of unit anymore. You have to have at least a minimum of balance. There's a little bit of kind of spread now enforced, which I think is really good for the game, to be honest. Or, like, this may be something that people have seen before. Now there's a cap of 2 on Necrofex Colossi. Triple or quadruple Necrofex Colossus builds when the Vampire Coast came out were rampant, because multiple Necrofex Colossi is just really hard to deal with, especially if, like, you have a Necrofex and then, where is he at? And then Count Noctilus on a Necrofex with his spells and stuff, and then you just fill the rest with, like, zombies. You know, I can have 10 infantry, or actually, I would probably swap these guys out for the pistol variant. Yeah, like that. You can have a whole bunch of infantry and even a couple of handguns, and still have enough for a 3rd Necrofex, but now you can't have 3 Necrofexes. So, this kind of army is also now limited, which, once again, I think is a really good thing. In addition, there have been a whole lot of balancing changes. There have been a lot of balancing changes to RORs and the way chevrons work. Chevrons now boost melee attack more than melee defense, if I recall correctly. And, of course, in the DLC, there have been a whole bunch of new Lizardman and Empire units, which look super cool. So for the Lizardmen, first of all, of course, we got Gorok, the Rockovitsa, the Great White Lizard, etc. And he's just kind of a melee foot tank. He's got this ability that gives him a ton of physical resistance. He already comes with built-in physical resistance on top of 100 armor and a silver shield, so he's very, very hard to snipe. He has the Shield of Eons, which gives him and everyone within 40 meters 60 armor and expert charge defense when it triggers. What this means is that Gorok, basically, between the Rock of Itza and the Shield of Eons, Gorok can sit in the middle of your line of Saurus or whatever and just say no to a charge. Basically just stop it dead. I mean, if you drop the Shield of Aeons on a bunch of Saurus warriors with shields, for example, all of a sudden they have 120 armor and expert charge defense, and anyone attacking them is just going to get absolutely bounced for those first 23 seconds. And then he has the Mace of Ulamog. As I said, the Mace of Ulamog is an extremely powerful self-buff. It kicks his melee attack up to 89, and it gives him a ton more damage. Like a ton more damage. I mean, plus 40% both armor piercing and weapon damage is a lot. The downside to it, of course, is that it does have a long cooldown, so you can only trigger it. You only trigger it when it's really, really important, and when you really have to win this fight right now. But in those situations, it is pretty great. Lord Croak, I believe, has gone up in price. And his Deliverance of Itzas, I think, are the same. Yeah, pretty sure they're the same. But in any case, he's gone up in price. In addition to Gorok, we've gotten two others. We've gotten the Kroxigor Ancient, and, of course, Nakai the Wanderer, who is kind of the heroic version of the Kroxigor Ancient. So the Kroxigor Ancient is, funnily enough, a Kroxigor. He's just a giant Kroxigor, a Kroxigor writ large with better stats, very high armor, high HP. He's got this monstrous strength ability, which gives him a huge increase to his bonus versus infantry, which is already not insubstantial. So his bonus versus infantry goes up to freaking 41 when he drops monstrous strength. He also has this Miasma of Despair, which is interesting. It's a leadership, speed, and vigor debuff. Pretty good, actually. The Amulet of Itzel gives him a ton of damage resist, and then the Horn of Kygor. This is the same stuff that the Saurus Oldblood has. So basic buffs, pretty solid stuff. Nothing really to write home about, but the main difference is the Kroxigor Ancient is large as opposed to small, and he's just a lot tougher than the Saurus Oldblood, but he can't write a mount. CA in general seems to be swinging towards trying to make Footlords useful, which I very much approve of, and giving them a whole lot more useful abilities and powers and stuff, which all seems really, really good to me. So then we come to Nakai the Wanderer, the eldest of the Kroxigor Ancients, or as they say, possibly the murderous spirit of the jungle made flesh. He is a Kroxigor Ancient, even bigger. He does not have a bonus versus infantry, but he has much higher base stats, so his melee attack and melee defense are both a lot higher, and his weapon strength is a lot higher, as well as having a massive armor-piercing contingent. He also has the Miasma of Despair, but he has this Primal Roar ability. And it's a huge buff that also makes everyone who gets it rampage. So, interesting. I'm not sure how useful it really is for 237. I can definitely see situations when it would be very useful. But, like, if you get, Nakai charging in behind a line of Saurus warriors or something, and 2 or 3 units can all get hit by the Primal Roar, that could just buckle the center of the enemy line right there. So I could see it being useful, but it's definitely not something to use willy-nilly. Because even though it only lasts 17 seconds, 17 seconds is long enough to get somebody in real trouble if you're not careful. For items, Nakai has the Golden Tributes. It's his only item, and they give him and everyone around him perfect vigor. That's actually really powerful. It's much more powerful than it sounds, because, because of the hidden stat debuffs that are attached to vigor, really. And they're pretty significant. An exhausted unit, compared to a fresh unit, is fighting, if I recall correctly, with significant penalties to armor, speed, melee attack, melee defense, and I think pretty much everything. I think it's attack, defense, and weapon strength. Somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But there are very, very serious stat debuffs associated with lower levels of vigor. So in the late game, if you have perfect vigor, and the people you're fighting don't, you effectively have like a really powerful buff spell running all the time. The difference is stark. So I would say that's actually a really good item. Now, its usefulness depends on keeping Nakai alive, because it only becomes useful after you've been fighting for at least a few minutes. But if you can get Nakai into the late game with his golden tributes and have a couple units hanging around him to absorb that tributeness, yeah, that would be pretty good. On top of that, the Lizardmen have also gotten a couple of units that I haven't really taken a super close look at yet. The Razordawn Hunting Pack. I'm not a big Lizardman player, to be honest, so I don't have a huge amount of experience with the Lizardmen in general. But we've got the Razordawns and the Amaxon Barbs. So the Razordawn Hunting Pack, they do have Primal Instincts. I guess you can kind of compare them to the Salamander Hunting Pack. Very similar price. In fact, they have the same weapon strength, but their ranged attacks are quite a bit different. So Razordawns compared to Salamanders. Razordawns have shorter range. Their missile damage is lower, slightly, but it's armor piercing. They fire 3 shots each, so you're getting 72 shots per volley, each of which is doing a little over 30 damage, and the vast majority of it is armor piercing damage. Compared to the Salamanders are firing just 1 shot each. It does a ton of damage, relatively little of it is armor piercing, and has a big bonus versus large. So essentially, what this says to me is that Razordons are actually more useful against armored infantry, like greatswords and swordmasters and black orcs. I think are the units that a Razordon hunting pack would want to be attacking if possible. So these are definitely flanking units to kind of mix in with your battle line and try to get on the armored enemy infantry or enemy monsters. A Razordon hunting pack at close range would probably shred large enemy monsters, I imagine. Now, salamanders would also do that because of their bonus versus large. And the bonus versus large of 26. They've got missile damage and armor-piercing missile damage at a ratio of roughly 5 to 1. So they'd end up with armor-piercing missile damage of like 22, maybe 23 per shot. That's not bad by any means, but it's compared to the Razordon's AP damage of 24 per shot and 3 times as many shots. So I think Razordons will still outdamage salamander hunting packs against large armored monsters. A lot will depend upon their accuracy, of course, which I haven't tested yet. The Amaxon Barbs, meanwhile, what's the difference with them? The Amaxon Barbs have missile resistance, and their attacks are poisonous. Ooh. And they have a faster reload time, of course, but attacks being poisonous, that's very interesting and actually very valuable. I was thinking they might be a little bit overpriced, but if they have poison missile attacks, then they will slow their opponents, which might let them get an extra volley in, so that's very, very interesting. On top of that, of course, we have my personal favorites, the Sacred Croxagores, aka Croxagores with Power Fists. If you compare Sacred Croxagores to regular Croxagores, standard Croxagores are specialized anti-infantry, anti-armored infantry, rather, monstrous infantry. They have a very high bonus versus infantry, very high armor-piercing ratio. Their overall stats, like their base stats, are just kind of low, to be honest. I mean, melee 20, attack 26, defense 26, charge bonus 22, nothing to seriously write home about. Ancient Croxagores, or Sacred Croxagores on the other hand, they have slightly more hit points, they have more leadership, but more importantly, their melee attack is up by 10, and their overall damage is significantly higher at the cost of losing that bonus versus infantry. So, Sacred Croxagores have higher both base and armor-piercing damage. The ratio is a little bit more skewed towards standard weapon damage because both weapon and armor-piercing, it looks like, went up about the same. Close to the same. But it's a lot more base damage. And, of course, their melee attack went up by 10. So they're more likely to hit large targets. What this means is that Sacred Croxagores are just kind of a good, I would say a good counter-charge unit. Yeah, their charge bonus isn't super, super high, but when they come in with that charge bonus, their melee attack will still briefly be 60. And when you're swinging with 60 melee attack and 144 damage, you're gonna lay a whooping on whatever it is you hit. They also have magical attacks, which isn't super common in the Lizardman roster, and gives some pretty solid counterplay against ethereal or physical resistance units. I'm thinking specifically of I was thinking of Orc Biggins. Or Savage Orc Biggins, rather, or Savage Orcs, but you probably don't want these guys fighting Savage Orc Biggins anyway. They take a lot of damage from that bonus versus large. Well, you might. I don't know. In any case, Sacred Croxagores, they're both interesting, and I just love their giant goofy fists. They're hilarious. The way these guys waddle is a sight to behold. A real joy. A real joy. And then, of course, you have the real champions of the DLC. The Dread Saurians. You're only ever allowed to have one. You cannot have a triple Dread Saurian army, which makes me so sad. But the Dread Saurians are, well, to be honest, from what I've seen and what I've looked over them and kind of done some testing, I don't think they're super efficient, but they're cool. And that's really what matters. Dread Saurians are giant monsters. They're actually the largest models in the game. Now, stat-wise, interestingly, they're not the toughest in the game. I think the highest HP total in the game actually belongs to... I'm losing my place again. Why can I never find things? The first time I look for them, there's Norska. I think highest HP in the game actually goes to War Mammoths. Feral Mammoths have 9,000 something. Soul Crusher is 10.6. Wolfric on his Mammoth is 10.6. So maybe not. Yeah, I guess they have very, very slightly less HP than War Mammoths. But what they do have is incredibly high base damage and high melee attack, plus pretty high speed. Dreadsaurians are kind of fast, which is weird considering how big they are, but true. So they're fast, they hit incredibly hard, and their melee attack is really high. Melee attack of 52 is impressive for a monster. They don't have any particular bonuses, but their base melee attack is high enough to kind of compensate for that, and their damage is like 2/3 armor piercing. So they hurt. They hurt a lot. Now, the Feral Dreadsaurian costs 2,300, which is expensive. That said, the Feral Dreadsaurian is not very flexible. It has missile resistance and it has armor, but even so, it gets shot down hard because it's impossible to miss it. It's just too huge. It causes terror, but it also has Rampage, which is bad. Rampage is the worst Primal Instincts, if you'll recall. And overall, I don't think the Feral Dreadsaurian is all that good. Now, as weird as it may be to say, I think paying the extra 900 for a standard Dreadsaurian might be the move. Because the standard Dreadsaurian has all the same base stats as the Feral Dreadsaurian, plus 10 more leadership, which is not insubstantial. It doesn't rampage, it can fire while moving, and it has a ranged weapon, a pretty freaking significant ranged weapon. 8 shots per volley, 10 volleys, 115 range, and it does a lot of damage. It actually does a lot of damage. Those poison missiles hit pretty hard, and as I just mentioned, they're poisonous. So poison lowers enemy damage a lot, it lowers their speed. It's a pretty significant debuff, especially in monster mashes. I think this Dreadsaurian beats the hell out of this Dreadsaurian, primarily because it will be poisoning its enemy all the time. And it won't be rampaging, so it won't be suckered away from a fight to do something else. You also have the Shredder of Lustria. The Shredder of Lustria is the ROR version, and it has Encourage and I think that's immune to psychology. What is that? What's that icon? Dread Aversion. So it lowers enemy leadership around it. So it not only encourages, it not only causes terror and fear, which fear, if you'll recall, is a leadership lowering effect. Then it also lowers the enemy leadership by another percentage itself. That's also, once again, kind of a big deal. The Shredder of Lustria can serve as a very, very potent terror bomb, because everyone around it has their leadership suppressed by, I think this is 13 by default, and losing that much leadership is not small. That's not small potatoes. That is a big, big deal. Drop a couple of spells to support that, and support it with a charge of Croxagores or something, a little bit of artillery fire, and I think you'll have the enemy front line just routing pretty quickly. Now, of course, you're spending 3,800 gold on that, which is a lot. That's a quarter of your army. It's actually more than a quarter of your army. The standard Dreadsaurian is about a quarter of your army, slightly higher. The Shredder of Lustria is closing in on a third. I'm not sure I would necessarily take the Shredder, but the standard Dreadsaurian, I can think of times then I would want that. The standard Dreadsaurian seems pretty powerful. It might even be worth the cost. It's really hard for giant monsters like that to pay for themselves. I think you might be able to do it. There is also, of course, a Sacred Croxagore ROR. They do have primal instincts like the regular ones do, but instead of missile resistance, they just have straight up physical resistance, which is pretty nifty. Also, they sunder armor. So compared to the standard Sacred Croxagores, they cost 450 more, which is a lot. But armor sundering is a very powerful ability, and physical resistance is also very powerful. It means that they can fight armor-piercing infantry without taking grievous damage. I think regular Sacred Croxagores really want to avoid AP infantry. The Cohort of Waddle might be able to take them if they have to. I wouldn't say it would be a great trade, but it might be a decent one. Oh, and of course they can hide in the forest. All of the Croxagores can hide in the forest, which is pretty neat. Speaking of hide in forest, so that's the Lizardmen. Those are the changes to the Lizardmen. They all seem pretty nifty to me. I don't know how often you're going to see the Shredder in multiplayer battles, but God, I hope you do. Like I said, I wouldn't necessarily bring the Feral Dreadsaurian. I think missing the missile attack and losing 10 points of leadership is a pretty significant punishment for a single large entity like this, especially a really expensive one. 10 points of leadership is important. That poison missile attack is really important. I think I would choke down the extra and just pay it. If I was bringing one of these bad boys, I think it would be this one. But in any case, so the Lizardmen have gotten these nice little changes. I don't know if I would call them buffs exactly. I don't know that the Lizardmen power level has really changed, but they've definitely got a lot of cool new toys, and I'm especially interested to test out Razordons at some point, because Razordons seem like they might be the closest thing to a competitive shift out of the new Lizardmen toys. There's also been a pretty significant rework, if I recall correctly, of some of the Beastmen stuff. In particular, Minotaurs. Like I said, I'm not going to go through every change. The change logs are available free online. You can, just take a gander at them. But Minotaurs, of course, now do have a limit to them. But there have been a couple of changes. For one thing, standard Minotaurs have now gotten a bonus versus infantry of 18, which is pretty crazy. Blood Greed has been altered to be a plus 15 leadership and immune to psychology effect in melee. That's, once again, very significant. Leadership 80 in melee plus immune to psychology, quite solid. Minotaurs with shields have not gotten the bonus versus infantry, interestingly. And of course, Minotaurs with great weapons have the bonus versus large. They're very, very large. Bonus versus large. The other thing now is that all of these guys can now hide in forests, which hilariously they couldn't do before. So you can now ambush very effectively with Minotaurs if you're careful with them. Supporting that, Ungor Spearmen and all the Ungor Spearmen units have now gotten stock and Vanguard deployment, which I think they had stock. They didn't have Vanguard at least before. So they've now gotten that, which means that you can now forward deploy if you care to. Archers, infantry, albeit cheap, crappy infantry, and spears. And you can back it up with Minotaurs hidden in forests. Now, that sounds like a Beastman army to me. Now we're kind of starting to get towards what the Beastmen should be. The Beastmen should be this very mobile, very flexible, very ambush-centric force that, comes out of nowhere and hits really hard. And I think we're beginning to move towards that, when before the Beastmen have not quite had that feel, to me at least. Oh, and Gorbel can hide in forests too, so of course there's that. Good old Gorbel. I love Gorbel. Even though he flies if touched, I still love him. Slap the Axe of Men on that bad boy. Oh yeah. Cause terror, unbreakable. Ooh, that could be nasty. But yeah, the Minobus has gotten a buff. The Ungor Spam has gotten a buff, so two very important parts of the Beastmen roster have gotten better. On top of that, what else has happened? Giants have gotten a buff kind of all the way across. They've gotten a little bit cheaper, and they were a little bit better. I forget if it was this patch or the patch before, but I know in this patch they got a little bit cheaper, and I think they also got an increase to something, weapon strength, something like that. In any case, I still don't think they're super worth it, because you can counter giants very effectively just by bringing some archers, but could be good in some contexts. Like if you're fighting, I don't know, who has really bad archers? If you're fighting greenskins who sometimes don't have great archery, or at least have to concentrate it on other targets, like heavily armored ones. If you're fighting Beastmen have pretty shit archery. Might be a place for those. Now, the other faction that got a big change in this update, this DLC, of course, was the Empire. The Empire got a pretty significant change, and I think the Empire is going to be the faction that ends up changed the most balance-wise. We've got the Huntsman General and Marcus Wolfhard, of course. So both of them are essentially ranged leaders. They're sort of like the Glade Lord, except without a dragon to ride. So that's a pretty significant change. But what's interesting is the Huntsman General has a whole bunch of these abilities that relate to fire, that either cause fire damage, imbue fire damage, or cause flame weakness. And of course, the Empire has access to Bright Wizards, so you've got a lot of fire-centric damage kind of things going on there. These abilities, interestingly, are very The Huntsman General is very supporty. That's basically what he is. He does have a very high missile damage, very high bonus versus large missile attack, so he can snipe out enemy monsters pretty effectively if given some time. But mainly he wants to kind of like be back with your archers, supporting them, giving them fire damage and faster reloads, throwing oil flasks at people who are trying to charge you because it does a ton of speed debuffing as well as the flame weakness. Stacking these two can melt enemy cavalry pretty effectively, to be honest, because, you know, you hit them with an oil flask, then you drop Hail of Fire, and you have your 3 or 4 ranged units all drop a volley. They're going to take a lot of damage with that 50% flame weakness. Combo that with the Kindle Flame. Every time you cast a spell, plus 22% weakness to fire damage. Now you're looking at plus 72% damage from anything that does fire damage, which includes, with Hail of Fire, arrows. So, that's bad. Item-wise, he's not surprised. He's not, like, exciting. He's got the Glittering Scales, he's got the Crown of Command, whatever. Marcus Wolfhard is not fire damage centric. Marcus Wolfhard is actually very different from the Huntsman General. He's not quite as supporty. He's more damagey. So he's got the Fleet-footed, which just makes him faster if people are close to him. Personally, I think I'd strip that off for 145 gold. He's got the Hunter's Snare, which is a net. It's not a very long net and only has 3 charges, but still it's a net. And you can use that to net enemy monsters or cavalry right where you want them in range of all of your ranged units. And he has the Focused Shot here. So the Focused Shot does scaled damage against combatants with missing health, which means that it's used to finish off people who are getting away, basically. If you're tired of the enemy lord running away from you with 500 HP remaining or something, you hit them with Focused Shot and they go down, because if they're missing 75% of their HP bar, it's going to kill them. Definitely going to kill them. It's designed to kill them if they're running away weakened. So that's what that's for. On top of that, he also has the Amber Bow, which fires a multi-shot magic missile that does a whole bunch of damage against single large combatants. It's like, it's like any other magic missile, really, but it's fairly powerful. I have played around with that a little bit. It's not insignificant. So, with the Amber Bow and the Focused Shot, Marcus Wolfhard is capable of dropping a lot of damage on especially large targets from a long way away. He has 180 range. He has Vanguard deployment. He can fire while moving. And he has the Snare. So he's dangerous. He's very dangerous. And he has a bonus versus large of 120. Most of which is going to be armor piercing. So every time he hits you, which he does every 7 seconds, he's going to be doing something like, what is that? 340, 350 armor piercing damage. It's pretty big. All the heroes are the same, I believe. I don't think there have been any new heroes. We do have the Grey Wizard, but that happened a little while back, if I recall. What we've gotten is a whole bunch of additional ranged units and war machines for the Empire. So first of all, we have archers. Archers are surprising to me, actually. I expected archers to be weaker than they are, but for 350, yeah, they only have 120 range, but their missile damage is pretty freaking good. 17 missile damage, 2 AP per shot, reload time of 9 seconds. For comparison, the other real short-range missile unit is Goblin Archers. So if I can ever freaking find greenskins, I don't know why that menu gives me so much trouble. But you can compare them to Goblin Archers. Goblin Archers have 90 models, but their missile damage is quite a bit lower. They do 10 and 1 armor piercing damage each. Archers do about twice the damage per shot. They do reload more slowly, and of course they fire fewer missiles, so overall damage is only about a quarter or a third higher. But Goblin Archers actually cost more, and for shorter range with lower leadership. And less HP. It's interesting. I think Empire Archers are honestly not a bad unit. Now, if you want range, you would go with crossbowmen or more likely handgunners, but I don't think there's any reason not to mix in some archers. I mean, especially if you took a Huntsman General, so you can trivially buff them with fire damage and drop fire weakness on your foes in a big way. I think Huntsman General plus Bright Wizard plus just bog standard cheap little archers is a pretty devastating combination. On top of that, of course, we've got the Deathjacks, who are an ROR version of the archers, and the difference is they have snipe and stalk and vanguard deployment, so pretty nifty. Then we have the Huntsmen. Huntsmen are essentially crossbowmen. In fact, they're almost identical to crossbowmen stat-wise. Slightly better armor, leadership, melee attack, whatever, it doesn't really matter. The main difference is Huntsmen have Vanguard deployment and stock, and they have a bonus versus large of 8. Now, a bonus versus large of 8 isn't amazing, but in this context, what it works out to is about a 40% increase in damage against large targets. That adds up real quick. Huntsmen are a pretty significant unit. They have 160 range, and they're, of course, invisible. So they're most like... I guess the closest comparison I could make would be to Dwarf Rangers, and if you'll recall, once Rangers came out, they more or less supplanted Quarrelers due to doing the same job but also with stock. And Huntsmen not only do the same job but with stock, they do the same job but with stock and bonus versus large. And large monsters are something that the Empire has sometimes struggled with. So, I think Huntsmen are probably the best overall new unit in the DLC. They're good. I think they're very, very solid. You also have the White Wolves, who are an ROR version of Huntsmen, which is also an infantry unit. They have actual melee stats, unlike pretty much any other archer. In terms of melee, they're actually better than swordsmen, albeit their unit is smaller, so there's that. But the White Wolves are very solid. They're immune to psychology. They have the stock. They have an encourage aura. Excellent, excellent unit. A little bit expensive maybe, but honestly for what they do, I think they're pretty much a shoo-in, or they would be if, of course, Regiments of Renown weren't now capped at 3. So you have to think a little bit more carefully nowadays about which RORs you want to bring. All of those are interesting. Most of those are useful. Archers, I think, are a good unit. Huntsmen are a really good unit. The White Wolves, the Deathjacks, both of those strike me as pretty good. Then we get to the fun part. The fun part of the DLC for the Empire is War Wagons. War Wagons are hilarious. I'm sorry, they just are. I love them. They're just wagons. They're just big ass wagons, drawn by horses and full of riflemen. So these guys have like Outrider repeating rifles, which have, incidentally, been fixed. Used to be that Outrider's actual DPS was a lot lower than this because their reload animation caused them to hang up and only fire like half as fast as they should. Well, that's apparently been fixed now. So Outriders now fire quickly, which means they're going to run out of ammunition. I mean, they'll run out of ammunition in under a minute of continuous fire, but it also means that they're going to dump their damage a lot more quickly, and once they've run out of ammo, if they've spent all their ammo on somebody, you've gotten your value out of Outriders. They're not that expensive. In any case, the guys in the War Wagon have Outrider repeating rifles, so they reload, they do the same damage, they reload in 5 seconds. They have a ton of ammunition, and if I recall correctly, there are, I want to say 3 or 4 of them per wagon. On top of that, you have wagons with mortars in them. And you have the Black Lions, who are the ROR wagon with a Hellblaster volley gun. Now, it's a shorter range gun than the standard Hellblaster volley gun, by 40. But its damage is actually higher, because its reload time is 7 seconds, whereas the standard Hellblaster's reload time is 9. So, the Black Lions are devastatingly powerful. 9 shots per volley, notice, doing 60 AP each. The Black Lions are ridiculous. In fact, I'm just gonna do something here real quick, just for laughs. Let's take a look at what happens to this posse of orcs as they charge the Black Lions. Because, of course, in addition to being an artillery unit that does a ton of damage, the Black Lions are also a chariot with a ton of armor and 60 speed. They're essentially cavalry artillery, or, well, chariot artillery, but you see what I'm saying. They do damage. They hurt a lot. And then, if someone's closing in on them, unlike any other artillery unit, they can just pack up and run away. I mean, people complained about the fact that Jezzails were, like, artillery with infantry speed. Well, the Black Lions are quite literally artillery with cavalry speed. It's only 50, I guess, so it's not quite, like, cavalry speed, but why aren't you shooting?
Sigma, guide our fire!
There we go. Yeah, look at that. Look at that shit. That Black Orc unit lost a third of its HP in one volley. Now, admittedly, it's blocked up, but still. And here comes another one. Absolute devastation. And now, the Black Orcs are getting kind of close. I guess it's time to leave. Yep. There we go, just trundling away. 50 speed, fast enough to kite infantry. Oh, what's that? They're far enough away to shoot again? Okay. Yep, let's just turn around and... there we go. Instant fire. Black Orcs defeated. And to be honest, this is... I've watched a few replays using these guys, and I've kind of played around with them slightly. Look at this. Look at this Black Orc war boss. He's trying to close in on these guys. And before he reaches them, he took one volley and it dropped him to like 40%. He lost, what is this, 30, 40% of his health? He lost more than 1,000, more than a third. So he's just done. I mean, my Empire General can now come in and just finish him off while these boys run away, because as soon as the Wa drops, as soon as the Wa and Foeseeker drop, rather, they're faster than he is, once again. If anything is going to be broken or overpowered in this DLC, the Black Lions are it, because they really are artillery with none of artillery's weaknesses. And I don't think they're even really being charged much for it. Let's take a look at the pricing real quick. But they're really, really good. 1,800 gold compared to 1,100 for the Hellblaster volley gun. So they're paying 70 essentially, or I'm sorry, 700. They're paying 700 to negate every weakness of artillery. It's an interesting choice. Now, I'm not going to say now that it's overpowered because I don't know. I haven't done enough testing for that. And of course, it isn't a regiment of renown. You can only have one. But I don't see a really compelling reason, if I'm building an Empire army, to not have the Black Lions. They do a ton of damage. They're very mobile, so they can get out of trouble. They're good against infantry, they're good against cavalry, they're good against enemy lords. They're good at everything. And they don't have a counter, really. I mean, I suppose the counter is enemy artillery, because of course they are short-ranged compared to other artillery. So if you're playing against somebody with cannons, those cannons can probably put paid to the Black Lions pretty effectively. Except they're actually less vulnerable to that than standard guns are, because the gun models can't be targeted out and destroyed. I mean, like, if you're firing cannons at a unit of artillery, very commonly one volley will destroy one or two of the guns themselves, and every time you destroy a gun, of course, the firepower of the unit goes down. Well, with the Black Lions, you have to actually kill the models. Like, you have to work your way through all the hit points, which isn't true with standard artillery units. Standard artillery units, you can often kill a gun without the unit losing much HP at all. I don't know. It's interesting. The Black Lions are very strong, and they're hilarious, and I love them. They might be a little too strong. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure how to deal with that. To be honest, I'm not sure what changes could be done to them to make them less strong without making them pointless, so I guess I'll leave it to the professionals, I suppose. But in any case, the Empire has definitely changed, and I would say changed for the better. They've gotten a lot more flexible in their missile troops. I think the Empire is now... I would go so far as to say that I think the Empire is now a shooting faction. I think Empire infantry is now going to be relegated mostly to providing support to the missile line, because as the Empire, you can now have the Black Lions, you can have like another war wagon or two, you could put your mortars on war wagons if you want, although that's a lot more expensive. That's double the cost, and it does lower range a little bit, so maybe you wouldn't put your mortars on war wagons. I probably still would, just because I love them. But you can have your, you have the Black Lions. You have a line of really, really cheap archers, like a bunch of them. You have, a Huntsman General and a Bright Wizard. And I'm just doing this real roughly. And then you have... Do you need another hero? You don't really need another hero. You get some Spearmen. You get Sigmar's Sons because they're unbreakable. A Flagellant or two. Some Swordsmen to hold the line. You get the Royal Altdorf Griffites for anti-large work. And you get, let's say, an Empire Knight. We're running a little bit short of funds. Why don't we take the shields off our Spearmen and then drop a sword? Then we could take another Empire Knight. Empire Knights, incidentally, got a visual rework. They look cool as hell now. Very, very nice. But they're also just cheap, effective, heavy cavalry. Decent charge bonus, okay-ish stats, heavy armor, shields. Good to go. Kind of lowish speed, but enough for government work. I mean, this army this is kind of a pretty good usable army right here. I'll probably actually cut one of the archers and use it to pay for another swordsman or something. Have a little bit more of an infantry line. But basically, all these guys have to do is stand there and not die long enough for the Black Lions and the archers, backed up by the mass fire damage boost, to destroy the enemy. And, you know, this guy, obviously, you're going to take off some of his spells. Like, you don't necessarily need the Burning Head. You could have Flamestorm, but you don't necessarily need Flamestorm. You can take away Cascading Fire Cloak. Flaming Sword is a good spell to keep. Fireball is a good spell to keep, albeit it has been nerfed, I believe. If I recall correctly, Fireball has also been nerfed in this patch. Keep a couple of spells there. Take... I don't think I've ever used this. I don't think I've ever seen that used. Take the Power Stone. Put him on a horse. This guy, keep all of his abilities. All of his abilities are really good. Doesn't need the items, but you might take the Glittering Scales. I think this is a perfectly functional army. The ranged power of the Empire is now quite significant. And the Black Lions, like I said, I mean, they move faster than infantry. You can just actually roll these guys forward, fire some shots into the advancing enemy, turn away, ride back through your lines, set up again, rake them as they're fighting your swordsmen and spearmen, kill out any elite armored infantry. You can't take elite infantry against the Empire anymore. It's not doable. You can maybe take elite cavalry because they're fast moving enough to close through the fire, but it's hard to kill war wagons because they have armor and it's only 3 models that you have to swarm around, so they're easy to saturate with chaff and let them run away. And if they run away, they'll just set up and pump fire into you again. So, I don't know. I think it's going to be a very, very different game fighting the Empire. Anyway, this video's run on long enough. There's my thoughts for now. Lizardmen, some cool stuff, have not, I think, fundamentally changed. I think the Lizardmen are basically doing the same thing, maybe slightly better. I don't know. I haven't tested out the Razordons yet. I think the Dreadsaurians, the Feral Dreadsaurian is probably not worth it. The ROR, probably not worth it. The standard Dreadsaurian might be worth it. I'm not sure, but that's probably the way I would go. The Empire, I think, got a real kick upwards. Archers are good units. Huntsmen are good units. Their RORs are good units. War Wagons are really cool. The Black Lions are a fantastic unit. The fire damage synergy is pretty crazily powerful if you do it right. So, I think Empire is the one to watch in this one. But in any case, thanks for your time. I'll see y'all out there on the ladder.